How's it going, guys? Kavi here. Today I wanted to go over my recommended leveling guide and build for leveling Barbarian, as well as the build that I intend on playing and starting out as. Whether or not it actually stays, we'll see. So this build only pushes to level 70. You can kind of push it to level 100 from there. It's just going to basically be adding some uniques. I'll probably add an update for that shortly after League starts if the build ends up working as well as I think it is going to. So pretty much for leveling, it's a pretty standard Whirlwind Barbarian leveling. First things first, when you start out, there are going to be some aspects that you want to be focusing on. Pretty much you're just going to be aiming for like your big 5 aspects here. So we're going to be going and getting Aspect of Echoing Fury. We're going to run the codex for this very early, as well as the one for Bold Chieftain's aspect, and then the one for Edge Master's aspect as well. Once you get these in place, you can pretty much just continue if you want to just spam one dungeon. If you want to just spam like Domhain Tunnels repeatedly all the way up to level 42 before you push into tier 3, you can do that. One important caveat while leveling is you want to ensure that you don't really want to be putting aspects on your two-handed weapons, because you're going to be swapping those out most frequently because you're going to be constantly upgrading stuff while you're leveling. And pretty much for the good chunk of like the first 30 levels of leveling, you're just basically equipping anything that's going to be green in a higher item level or higher damage, because you're going to see more damage out of that than anything else. For the vampiric powers here, we have Metamorphosis, which this one's going to be big because this is going to be giving us Unstoppable, as well as inflicting Vampiric Curse. With Vampiric Curse comes the ability to also use these. We have Prey on the Weak, which is going to give us increased damage to vulnerable enemies, as well as making enemies vulnerable. Then we have Sanguine Brace, which is going to be giving us Fortify on kill. And then we're getting extra critical chance because of Fortify. We have other Fortify effects in the build, so this is going to ensure that we have really high uptime on this 8% crit chance. And then we have Flowing Veins, which is going to be extra dot damage for enemies that are affected by the Vampiric Curse, as well as Bathe in Blood, which is just going to be additional damage, as well as additional damage reduction. For your gems, you want to be using either Sapphires or you can be using Sapphires or Emeralds. It doesn't really matter. I think Sapphires might end up being better because of the way that the vulnerability kind of crit damage bucket was changed. We'll have to test it out. You are basically going to have things permanently slowed because of proccing bleed on them, so this one might actually be fine without it. And then for armor, because Fortify is now based off of maximum life, you want to just be running rubies as well. And then for jewelry, it's either going to be skulls or diamonds. It depends on whether or not you need resistances or armor. For the skills itself, you are running pretty standard Barbarian setup here with Rallying Cry, Challenging Shout, Ground Stomp, Call the Ancients, and then Lunging Strike for extra mobility, as well as Whirlwind. And for the technique, I typically end up running the bleeding one here. You can also run the vulnerability damage multiplier one as well. I use this, you're going to see here in a second, for a setup specifically so that you can take advantage of Hamstring here in order to get a slow off, and then you can use that with No Mercy in order to get 9% increased critical strike chance. Pretty standard setup here. You basically pick up your first couple points in Lunging Strike, and then we're maxing out Whirlwind. We're picking up Ground Stomp, Rallying Cry, and Challenging Shout. You have a few options here depending on what you're trying to do. You can run the extra Fury generation from Rallying Cry if you don't want the defenses from Strategic Rallying Cry, as well as you can run the Thorns here from Challenging Shout instead of the additional Fury. That comes down to a personal choice. Same thing with Call the Ancients. If you are someone who's more experienced playing Barbarian and you don't really have issues, or if you're going to be playing in group play, you can run Steel Grasp instead of Call the Ancients here to get some additional source of berserking as well as an additional source of vulnerability. I personally like running Call the Ancients because the spike damage on it is extremely high. And it's basically a button that you know is going to kind of save you in any situation, or whenever it's up, you know you're going to have massive kill potential for the whole screen. Versus Steel Grasp does require you to actually be like positioning a little bit better, and you have to, in order to like fully utilize it or like fully get a good effect out of it. Where Call of the Ancients, you just hit the button and they're just going to kind of clear the screen for you. Last thing, we're taking Walking Arsenal. You don't have the rage generation typically to support Unbridled Rage yet until you start to get the cooldown reduction as well as the Fury, like the resource cost reduction, things like that. You kind of need to get all of those stacked before you can swap to Unbridled Rage later on. So this is kind of what I recommend leveling with. And pretty much for leveling, you're just going to basically just be running in using Whirlwind on everything, or you're going to be lunging strike forward until you get to a pack, and then you kind of whirlwind backwards behind it. And then you want to stagger your shouts in order to have high uptime on your shout cooldowns here, which are going to give you additional damage reduction as well as some healing. Once you are getting to level 42 and you are pushing into tier 3, you do want to be kind of finishing these aspects. At that point, you will end up swapping over to a Bleed Barb setup here. So important changes from the skill tree from leveling, you end up using this one here, where your Whirlwind does additional damage after 2 seconds. That's because you won't always be using a slashing weapon while you're leveling. Again, you'll just be changing your weapon out all the time. It's more important to use the other one to where you're just not going to get punished if you end up using a hammer, and you can just leave your weapon on auto select. Because of using Walking Arsenal, you do want to ensure that your lunging strike, you end up wanting to set it to middle click here to ensure that you change this to dual wield instead of auto select. And then you can leave your weapon, your Whirlwind, either on auto select so that it's basically selecting between your hammer or your two-handed sword, whichever is stronger, or your two-handed slashing weapon rather. But you do want to ensure that you're changing this here in the arsenal selection so that you can take full advantage of Walking Arsenal to ensure that you're actually getting 2 of the damage bonuses going at once, because it's going to give you your 20% increased damage instead of 10. Starting after you get 42, typically that's roughly around the point for most people where they're able to do the quest in order to push to tier 3. From there, that's when you basically start to rotate the build into a Bleed Barbarian build or a Whirlwind Bleed build. Nothing really changes in regards to the Vampiric powers. These are all exactly the same. You are going to see some different changes in the aspects. So this is where I started to include some of the aspects that don't come from Codex. We have aspect of the Grasping Whirlwind here. We want that in our helmet. For your chest armor, you want aspect of Might, which is going to give you additional damage reduction. For your gloves, you are running Exploiter's aspect, which is just additional damage against bosses and things that do go unstoppable. We have aspect of the Protector here, which is just going to give you additional barrier. We have Ghostwalker aspect, which is additional movement speed and the ability to move freely after you were either unstoppable or after, which this procs with Metamorphosis, so we're constantly in a state where we're like within 4 seconds of being unstoppable all the time. You have aspect of Limitless Rage for your weapon here, which is going to basically be giving you additional damage for your next core skill. And then we have Edgemaster's aspect, aspect of the Expectant, and then aspect of Berserk Ripping here, which is going to be a big source of your bleed damage that you're going to be getting. And then for our rings, we still have the 2 shout skills here, the one for shout cooldown as well as Fury on shout. And then on Amulet, you end up running aspect of Disobedience. Pretty much the only thing that changes in your skills here, you end up fully leaning into all of the cries. So you do end up dropping Stomp at this point, because you have enough other sources of rage generation, as well as you don't need the defenses from Stomp anymore. At this point, you end up picking up Warcry for an additional source of berserking as well as damage. And then we pick up Wrath of the Berserker because this is now going to be a multiplier instead of additive damage from berserking. For your technique, you end up using vulnerable damage here. And then for the skill tree, again, we end up swapping this over to Furious Whirlwind because we'll always be using a two-handed slashing weapon now. I put 1 point into Pressure Point here in order to pick up an additional source of vulnerability. And then you're basically picking up all this additional life and damage reduction. Nothing changes on the shouts here. You end up maxing out Raid Leader in order to get some additional heals. And then we're maxing out the Fury Generation while berserking, damage reduction while berserking. We end up picking up Pit Fighter here, the additional bleeding damage from Cut to the Bone. And then we end up taking counteroffensive here, Wrath of the Berserker points, and then we end up swapping to Unbridled Rage, because at this point we should have enough cooldown recovery speed, and then again Fury cost reduction on our jewelry and on our items in order to sustain Unbridled Rage. For Paragon, I recommend starting out here with Disembowel. You can get this. This is going to basically reduce the cooldowns on everything for you whenever you're killing a bleeding enemy. This should just help keep you have high uptime on your shouts and on your Wrath of the on your shouts. And then the first slate that I recommend going after here is going to be the 1/4 Blood Rage. This is going to give us a additional chance to be getting berserking whenever we kill a bleeding enemy, and also increase our damage by a percentage of the total amount that we have for our damage while berserking bonus, which that was where we start picking this up on the tree here. This damage while berserking and berserking duration. For your second glyph, you are going to end up wanting to run Martial, which is again just further reducing the cooldown of your shouts. And then we end up moving over here into running Wrath, which is just going to be some additional Fairy Generation as well as Critical Strike damage here. And then you end up cycling down into this next slate here, which is Carnage, which is going to be giving us more of this damage while berserking effect here, which, as you saw before, is a multiplier because of Blood Rage. And then that's going to be it for this tree. Pretty much as you push this towards level 100, you would just basically be finishing off this glyph here. End up pushing it over into the next thing over here. You'd end up pushing it over into the next. We'd actually want to rotate this board here. I'll have to fix this because you'll want to rotate this board into where you're actually entering from this attachment gate here on this side, and then you would basically, so this is leaning outwards here because you pretty much want to go in this corner here. So I'll rotate this and I'll fix it, but you're pretty much going to be going this exact same spot. For those looking for something a little bit different, which is what I end up actually intending on playing, I recommend this build as like a safe option if you want something that is just guaranteed to work and it's going to work well. Stick with the Blade Barb if you want something that's going to be a little bit different or a little bit more fun, or depending if you find it fun. I think it's going to be fun. Is going to be a Thorns variant for Whirlwind here. Pretty much most things stay the same on the Vampiric powers, except we are adding Jagged Spikes, which is just giving our Thorns a 10% chance to deal 300% increased damage, as well as... so the only things that really change in regards to this are the aspects that we have on our weapons. Instead of it being Berserk ripping on our two-handers, we're going to be running Needle Flare aspect on this, so that we have a 60% chance to have Thorns basically be an AoE. And then we run Death Wish aspect, which is going to be a huge source of Thorns while berserking for your weapon. You're still just running Sapphires here. And then for our armor, you can run either Emeralds or Rubies. I don't remember what the values are. I think the values on Emeralds are going to be worth it for Thorns, but if they're not, then we're just going to end up swapping over to Rubies because of some of the stuff we're getting on the tree. And then for the traits here, you end up running the exact same skills, except you're running Frenzy instead of Lunging Strike, just for the additional damage reduction. And then we are using the two-handed sword technique so that we have a constant source of bleeding. And then for the tree, pretty much everything stays the same in regards to the Whirlwind, except the only difference now is we're picking up the Tough as Nails here trait So we have additional Thorns damage, as well as Thorns cause enemies to bleed. And then we don't go all the way down here into the Fury generation. We just end up grabbing the damage reduction here. We put 1 point into Hamstring just for an additional... so we have things that are going to be crowd controlled while they're bleeding. And then we end up picking up Defensive Stance here. We put 1 point in Counter Offensive. The 3 points in Wrath of the Berserker. And I believe Unconstrained is probably going to end up being the best on this. It really depends on... how this works with the new multiplier version, because if Berserking is now a 60% more multiplier, then Unconstrained is definitely going to be better, because of the fact that the damage bonus from Berserking, if Berserking is now a more multiplier instead of additive, then of course Unconstrained is going to be higher than anything else we can be running. So this is what we're going to most likely be running. But you'll have to test it out and see if Unbridled Rage ends up coming out slightly ahead, or if you end up wanting to stick with Walking Arsenal. For the Paragon tree, this is where you end up starting out with Disembowel still. We're still going into the Blood Rage slate here. This doesn't change at all, except you pick up Ire here. For a lot of the Thorn stuff, you're picking up more defensive options rather than offensive at first. Just because Thorns is going to be carrying a lot of your damage, so you don't need to be picking up as much offensive stuff. And then same thing here, we're just going over to this Carnage tree here, where we're just taking this right here, where we're ending up running Martial for our second glyph as well, as we do on the other tree. And then we work our way up here, up into Territorial. And then this will kind of push over into the next board, where you'll pick up other stuff. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. I've attached a spreadsheet that covers where to unlock the codexes, as well as pictures of exactly where they are and the recommended order to unlock them. So if you actually look in here, I took pictures of all of the dungeons that are required to run. And exactly what they do. These are roughly in the order that I'd recommend running them in. I'm typically, on League Start, I'll typically just run these first 3. I'll just get Aspect of Echoing Fury, Ghostwalker, and then Edgemaster. Bold Chieftains, it'll depend on where in the step of this quest, if this is added to the Codex as like a seasonal one again or not. It was last league. We don't know if it's going to be this league. Hopefully it is, because it makes a huge difference. But pretty much the rest of them, just run them whenever you get a chance, or if you just want to run them all right away, that's recommended as well. You just probably won't be able to put them on everything right away, because you're going to be swapping gear a lot while leveling. But these are pictures for all of them. I recommend using Map Genie if you do end up needing to look up anything specific on the map itself. And then, yeah, other than that, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And other than that, see you in the next one.